I'm Joshua. I'm 28 years old, and at a Thanksgiving dinner surrounded by my family, I discovered my entire life of struggle was built on a lie. Before I tell you about the Christmas party where I finally exposed everything and the shocking truth about my parents' crimes, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Alright, let's go back to that Thanksgiving. You have to picture the scene. My grandparents' dining room is something out of a magazine. A long mahogany table gleaming under a crystal chandelier, silverware so polished you could see your reflection, and about 20 relatives all dressed in their holiday best. Then there was me. I was in a pair of slacks I'd bought from a thrift store for $7 and a button-down shirt that was just a little too tight at the shoulders from the long hours I spent bussing tables and stocking shelves. I always felt like a ghost at these gatherings, present but not really seen, a slightly less polished version of everyone else, the black and white photo in a room full of color. The air was thick with the scent of roasted turkey and my mother's forced cheerfulness. She and my dad, David and Sarah Anderson, were masters of appearances. They orbited my younger brother, Liam, the golden child, laughing at his jokes and beaming with pride as he talked about his new tech startup. I just sat there, nursing a glass of water, my mind a million miles away, trying to calculate if my next paycheck would cover rent and my upcoming tuition payment. It was going to be tight. It was always tight. The dinner conversation was a blur of stock market talk and vacation plans to places I could only dream of, until my grandfather, William, stood up. He's a self-made billionaire, a man whose presence fills any room he enters. He raised his glass, his eyes scanning the table until they landed on me, a rare, warm smile on his face. "A toast," he said, his voice booming slightly, "to family, and to Joshua. We're so proud of the man you're becoming. I'm glad you're enjoying the college fund we set up for you. Use it well, son." The clinking of glasses stopped. A sudden, sharp silence fell over the table, so profound you could hear the soft flicker of the candles. I just stared at him, my mind completely blank. The words echoed, but they didn't make sense. College fund? It sounded like a foreign language. I blinked, my throat suddenly tight. "What fund?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, almost swallowed by the heavy silence. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. My dad, who had been taking a sip of wine, choked, a spray of red misting the white tablecloth like a crime scene. My mom went completely pale, her hand flying to her throat as if she couldn't breathe. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her wine glass. Across the table, my little 8-year-old cousin, a kid who says whatever is on his mind, leaned toward his mom and whispered, loud enough for the entire table to hear, "Wait, you didn't know?" And in that moment, the perfectly polished world of my family cracked right down the middle. I didn't know it then, but this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was the beginning of the end. The story doesn't climax here, though. It freezes, right in that suffocating, deafening silence. To understand what happened next, to understand the rage that would eventually fuel me, you have to understand the 28 years of struggle that came before it. My life, up until that Thanksgiving dinner, was defined by one thing: a constant, grinding hustle. It wasn't a choice. It was survival. While my family tree had deep roots in wealth, my branch seemed to have been completely starved of water, left to wither in the shade. My apartment was a cramped studio on the 4th floor of a walk-up, with windows that rattled every time a truck went by. The paint was peeling in the bathroom, creating abstract maps of decay, and the kitchen sink had a permanent drip, 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 that I'd learned to tune out like a morbid white noise machine. It wasn't much, but it was mine, paid for by my own 2 hands, with skin that was perpetually calloused and dry. And those hands were always busy. My days were a grueling marathon that started before sunrise. I'd work a shift at a coffee shop from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., the smell of burnt espresso and steamed milk clinging to my clothes like a second skin. Then I'd have a couple of hours to cram in some studying for my community college classes, usually in the back of a noisy library, before heading to my second job, bussing tables at a greasy spoon diner until midnight. I lived on lukewarm coffee and the leftover fries they let me take home. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't always afford, a debt I was constantly accruing. I remember one particularly brutal winter that almost broke me. The heating in my ancient building gave out, and for 3 long weeks, I could see my breath inside my own apartment. I wore 3 layers of clothes to bed and typed my essays with numb, clumsy fingers, my body shivering uncontrollably. It was during that cold snap that my car, a beat-up 20-year-old sedan I called the Rust Bucket, finally gave out. The transmission died. The mechanic looked at me with pity in his eyes and quoted me a repair bill of $500. To me, at that moment, that might as well have been $5 million. I spent a full day agonizing, my stomach twisted in knots of shame and desperation, before I finally swallowed my pride and called my parents. I can still hear the conversation perfectly, every word a small, sharp shard of glass in my memory. I explained the situation, my voice tight, trying to sound matter-of-fact and not like the desperate son I was. "Josh, you're a grown man now," my dad said, his tone laced with that familiar, weary disappointment he reserved just for me. "You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. We can't just bail you out every time you have a problem. That's not how the real world works. It builds character." "I'm not asking for a handout," I pleaded, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. "Just a loan. I'll sign a contract. I'll pay interest. I can pay you back, I swear. I can't get to my jobs without the car. I'll lose them." "Your brother Liam," my mom chimed in, her voice smooth and reasonable, a silken dagger. "He started his company with a loan from the bank, not from us. He understands financial responsibility. He drew up a business plan. You need to be more like your brother, Joshua. Think ahead." That was a lie, a complete and utter fabrication, but I didn't know it at the time. All I knew was the cold finality in their voices. They weren't going to help. They were teaching me a lesson. I hung up the phone, the silence in my freezing apartment roaring in my ears. It was a silence filled with my own inadequacy. I felt a profound sense of loneliness, a feeling that I was completely and utterly on my own, a castaway on an island just a few miles from a shore lined with my own family. My friend Chloe, who had been my roommate before I scraped enough together for my own place, found me an hour later, just sitting on my bed, staring at the peeling paint on the wall. She took one look at my face and didn't have to ask. She didn't say much, no empty platitudes or easy reassurances. She just went to her own piggy bank, a ridiculous ceramic pig she'd had since she was a kid, and without a moment's hesitation, smashed it on the floor. She kneeled amidst the pink ceramic shards and counted out $273 in crumpled bills and heavy rolls of change. She pushed it all into my hand. "It's a start," she said softly. "We'll figure out the rest." That was the difference. While my family lectured me on character from their warm, comfortable home, my friend, who had even less than I did, gave me everything she had without a second thought. That memory became a cornerstone of my life. You can't rely on anyone but yourself. And for years, I believed that was a harsh but necessary lesson my parents wanted me to learn. I never imagined the truth was so much darker, so much more cruel. To understand the geography of my family, you have to understand the son everything revolved around, Liam. My younger brother lived in a different universe, a golden-tinted reality where every seed he planted grew into a money tree overnight. Or so I was told. At every family gathering, Liam was the main event, the star of a show I was merely a stagehand for. My parents would hang on his every word, their faces glowing with a pride they never, not once, showed for me. Liam's startup just secured another round of funding. My dad would announce to anyone who would listen, puffing out his chest, "He's a natural-born entrepreneur. Just has that instinct, you know? And he's so generous," my mother would add, patting his arm lovingly. "He just took us all on a trip to Hawaii last month. The boy works so hard. He deserves it." I saw the pictures on social media. My entire family, tanned and smiling, raising cocktails on a beach at sunset. I saw them while on my 15-minute break at the diner, my back aching and my clothes smelling of grease. I double-tapped the picture, a hollow feeling echoing in my chest, and went back to clearing dirty plates. His life was a curated collection of Instagram-worthy moments. He drove a new German sports car, lived in a sleek downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows, and wore clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I was supposed to be proud of him, and a part of me tried. But it was hard to feel pride when I was constantly being held up against him as a cautionary tale, a living example of what not to do. My Aunt Carol, my mom's sister, was particularly skilled at this insidious form of comparison. She had a way of delivering a compliment that felt like a slow-acting poison. "Oh, Joshua, it's so admirable that you're working so hard at the diner," she'd say at Christmas, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It just goes to show, not everyone is cut out for the stress of the business world like Liam. But we need hard-working people in the world, too. Where would we be without them?" She'd smile sweetly, as if she'd just paid me the highest compliment, while simultaneously cementing my place at the bottom of the family ladder. I learned to just nod and smile, to retreat into myself. Arguing was pointless. In their eyes, Liam was the success story, the validation of their parenting, and I was the struggling older brother, the one who just couldn't get his act together. He was the sun. I was the forgotten planet in a cold, distant orbit, notable only for my lack of light. I remember his 25th birthday vividly. My parents threw him a massive party at a rented-out art gallery. There was a caterer serving tiny, unidentifiable appetizers, an open bar with a professional mixologist, and a DJ playing trendy music. They presented him with his gift, a Rolex watch. The crowd of his fashionable friends applauded. I gave him a framed photo of us as kids, playing in a pile of autumn leaves, the only thing I could afford that felt personal. He glanced at it, gave me a quick, dismissive "thanks, man," and set it down on a table where it was quickly buried under empty cocktail glasses and forgotten. Later that night, I was standing in a quiet corner when I overheard my dad talking to my Uncle Richard. "I worry about Joshua," he said, shaking his head with a sigh that was pure performance. "He has no ambition, no drive. Liam, on the other hand, that kid is going places. Every dollar we've invested in him has paid off tenfold." Invested. The word stuck with me, a splinter in my mind. At the time, I just assumed he meant emotional investment, the investment of time and encouragement. I pictured them giving Liam pep talks, offering him sage advice, being the supportive parents I always craved. The thought that they were literally, financially investing in him never crossed my mind. Why would it? Their core philosophy, the one they had drilled into me relentlessly, was to let their children make their own way. Apparently, that philosophy only applied to one of their children. The injustice of it all simmered under the surface, a low-grade fever I'd learned to live with. I had accepted my place in the family hierarchy. I was the placeholder son, the cautionary tale, the one who made Liam's success shine that much brighter by comparison. And the most painful part was, I thought it was my own fault. Back at the Thanksgiving table, the suffocating silence stretched for an eternity. My grandfather looked from me to my parents, his brow furrowed in deep, genuine confusion. "Joshua, did you hear me?" My dad finally found his voice, a strained, wheezing sound that was completely unlike him. "William, I think you're mistaken. It was a small account, a little nest egg. We had to use it for some family emergencies over the years. It's all gone now. It was no big deal." No big deal. My grandfather's voice dropped, losing its festive warmth and gaining a hard, steely edge that could cut glass. "That was a substantial college fund, David. I seeded it with $250,000. It was meant for his education, his future. What in God's name constitutes that many emergencies?" My mother jumped in, her hands fluttering nervously like trapped birds. "Oh, William, you know how it is. The house needed a new roof one year, and Liam's braces were so expensive. Then there was the market crash. We were just using it as a family resource. We always meant to pay it back, of course. A family resource." The words hit me like a physical blow. My struggle, my exhaustion, my constant fear of not making rent, my nights spent shivering in a cold apartment. All of it flooded my mind. I had been their family emergency. I was the crisis they chose to ignore, while they used my money, my future, to fix a leaky roof and straighten my brother's perfect teeth. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly, violently, against the polished hardwood floor. I couldn't breathe in that room anymore. The air was thick with lies. "I need some air," I mumbled, my voice hoarse, as I walked out of the dining room on unsteady legs, feeling 20 pairs of eyes on my back. My parents followed me into the grand hallway, their footsteps quick and anxious. "Joshua, you're making a scene," my mother hissed, grabbing my arm. Her touch felt alien. I pulled away from her as if I'd been burned. "A scene." I turned to face them, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in my entire life. "You lied to me for 28 years, and you're worried about a scene? You don't understand the pressure we were under," my dad said, his face red and blotchy, his voice rising. "We did what we had to do for this family. That money helped us maintain our lives. It helped give your brother a good start. It wasn't just your money. It was family money. It had my name on it, didn't it?" I shot back, taking a step closer, my whole body trembling. "Grandpa set it up for me. You stood by and you watched me nearly drown, Dad. You watched me work myself to the bone. You told me to be a man and handle my own problems, all while you were spending the safety net that was meant for me. How could you? How could you watch your own sons suffer like that?" They had no answer. They just stood there, their faces a pathetic mixture of guilt and defiance. The lies had finally caught up to them, and they didn't know how to spin this one. I didn't wait for an explanation I knew would never come. I turned and walked out the front door, slamming it behind me with a satisfying boom that echoed through the house. The cold November air was a shock, but it was clean. It was honest. As I walked to my beat-up car, the symbol of my long struggle, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let this go. I was done being the quiet, understanding, forgotten son. I was going to find out the truth down to the very last stolen dollar. The Monday after Thanksgiving was cold and gray, a perfect reflection of my mood. The city seemed to be mourning with me. I skipped my morning classes and took the bus downtown to the main branch of the bank my grandfather had mentioned. The building itself was imposing, all marble and brass, designed to make you feel small. It worked. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread and determination as I walked inside. I was directed to a young banker named Michael. He had kind eyes and a nervous habit of adjusting his tie, and I think he could sense my anxiety. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, my voice carefully modulated to hide the storm raging inside me. I told him I believed a college fund or a trust account had been opened in my name years ago by my grandfather, and that I needed to see the records. He typed my name and date of birth into his system. I watched his expression change in real time. His eyebrows shot up, and he let out a low, involuntary whistle. "Wow, okay," he said, looking at me with a newfound respect, or maybe pity. "Yes, an account was opened for you by your grandfather, William Anderson, on your first birthday." He paused, his professional demeanor slipping as he looked at the screen, then back at me. "It was a custodial account with your parents, David and Sarah Anderson, listed as the custodians." "Was?" I asked, my throat suddenly as dry as desert sand. The past tense was not a good sign. He nodded slowly, his kind eyes now filled with sympathy. "The account was closed 3 months ago. The final withdrawal was for the remaining balance. The balance was 0. 0. The word hung in the air between us, an epitaph for a life I never got to live. It wasn't a surprise, not really, but hearing it confirmed by a stranger, in this cold and official place, felt like a final judgment. "Can I see the statements?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion that was choking me. "I need to see everything. Every withdrawal, every transfer. From the very beginning." Michael hesitated, looking around the lobby. "Technically, since you were the beneficiary and you're now of legal age, you have the right to access the records. But this is highly unusual. There's a lot of paperwork. Are you sure?" "I have time," I said, my gaze unwavering. He must have seen something in my eyes, a resolve that wouldn't be denied, because he sighed and disappeared into a back room. He returned 20 minutes later with a stack of papers so thick it looked like a novel. "I've printed the last 10 years of statements," he said, pushing the heavy stack across the counter. "Anything older than that is archived, but this should give you a start." I thanked him, my voice a croak, and found a small, secluded table in the bank's lobby. My hands were shaking as I looked at the first page. The initial deposit from my grandfather was staggering. It was more money than I could have comprehended. It was enough for tuition at any university in the country, enough for a down payment on a house, enough to start a life without the constant, crushing weight of financial anxiety. It was a life of possibility, a life I never got to live. Then I saw the withdrawals. They started small, a few $100s here and there, labeled with plausible deniability, household expenses or emergency repairs. But as the years went on, as I got older, the amounts grew larger and more frequent. Thousands of dollars at a time. The reasons became vaguer, more insulting: family investment, living expenses, loan repayment. Whose loan? Certainly not mine. I saw a $5,000 withdrawal on the week of my own 18th birthday, labeled miscellaneous. My parents had given me a $100 gift card for my birthday that year. The cruelty of it stole my breath. It was all there in cold, hard black and white, a systematic draining of my future. Page after page, year after year, I watched my safety net being dismantled, my dreams being cashed in to pay for their comfort and my brother's ambitions. I sat there for over an hour, the bustling bank fading into a dull roar around me. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. This wasn't just irresponsible parenting or a series of bad choices. This was theft, a long, slow, meticulous crime, and they had gotten away with it for 27 years. The stack of papers in my hands wasn't just a financial record. It was evidence. It was an indictment. That night I didn't sleep. Sleep was an impossible luxury. My tiny apartment became a war room. I spread the bank statements across the worn wooden floor, the white pages glowing in the dim light of my single desk lamp. With a pot of bitter, black coffee by my side, I began the painstaking process of cross-referencing the dates. I pulled up my old digital calendars, scrolled through years of my family's social media feeds, and dug out old emails. Anything that could give context to the cryptic withdrawals. That's when the real picture, the truly sickening picture, began to emerge. That's when I found the pattern. In May of 2018, there was a withdrawal of $10,000, labeled simply family investment. I remembered that month with perfect clarity. That was when Liam, my golden boy brother, announced he was starting his tech company, Innovate Solutions. My parents had thrown a lavish dinner party to celebrate, praising his courage and business acumen. They had toasted his future, my future. In September of 2019, another $20,000 vanished from my account. The memo line on the statement was blank. I searched Liam's Instagram feed for that month, and there he was, beaming in front of a brand new, shiny black sports car, the kind I couldn't even afford the insurance on. The caption read, "Hard work pays off. Feeling blessed. Hashtag entrepreneur, hashtag grind." The bitter irony tasted like acid in my throat. The pieces started clicking into place, each one a hammer blow to my chest, cracking open the foundations of everything I thought I knew about my family. A massive $50,000 withdrawal in early 2021 coincided perfectly with the seed funding Liam claimed he had secured from an anonymous angel investor. My parents had been so proud. He did it all himself, my mother had told everyone. He's a genius. The angel investor was me. I just didn't know it. My guardian angels were the ones robbing me blind. This was the first major twist, the one that changed everything from a story of neglect to a story of active, malicious conspiracy. My money hadn't just been used for a new roof or my brother's braces. It wasn't just frittered away on household bills. It had been systematically and deliberately funneled into building my brother's entire life, his entire career, his entire fraudulent identity as a successful self-made man. The anger that rose in me was pure and white-hot. It burned away the hurt and left behind a core of cold, hard rage. Every time they had praised Liam for his success, they were actively mocking me. Every time they told me to work harder, they were rubbing my face in the fact that my hard work was being used to fund his easy life. My sacrifice wasn't just ignored. It was the fuel for his engine. The trip to Hawaii, the fancy dinners, the designer clothes, the sports car, the startup company. I had paid for all of it with my sweat, my anxiety, and my lost dreams. I felt a sudden, sharp memory surface, so vivid it was like I was reliving it. A phone call from a few years back. Liam, his voice full of smug excitement, telling me about his new office space. You should see it, Josh. It's got a killer view of the city. You know, you could have all this too if you just applied yourself a little more. You just have to want it. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I started circling the transactions, drawing lines on a separate piece of paper, connecting the dates of the withdrawals to the milestones of Liam's success. The evidence was undeniable. This wasn't just about my parents' betrayal anymore. This was about my brother's complicity. Did he know? Did he have any idea that his success was a complete fabrication, built on the back of his struggling older brother? At that moment, I didn't care. He was a part of it. He had happily reaped the benefits. I leaned back against my worn-out couch, the papers spread around me like the debris of a shipwreck. The feeling of being an outsider, of being less than, that had haunted me my whole life. It all suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. It wasn't a feeling. It was a carefully constructed reality. In their eyes, I was a resource, a walking, talking bank account to be used for the benefit of their real son, their golden child. I picked up my phone. The time for feeling hurt was over. It was time to get smart. It was time to get even. The next morning, my exhaustion was masked by a surge of adrenaline. I walked into the legal aid office at my college. The place was small and smelled of old books and fresh coffee, a scent of comfort and seriousness. I was introduced to a woman named Ms. Davis, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer in her late 40s with kind but piercing eyes that seemed to see right through you. I laid the thick stack of bank statements on her desk, my hands surprisingly steady. The binder felt like a shield. She listened to my entire story without interruption, her expression unreadable. She would occasionally pick up a statement, her finger tracing a large withdrawal, a small frown line appearing between her eyebrows. When I finished, the whole sordid tale hanging in the air between us, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me for a long, silent moment. "Mr. Anderson," she said finally, her voice calm and even, which was somehow more reassuring than sympathy would have been. "What your parents did is called misappropriation of funds. As custodians of the account, they had a fiduciary duty, a legal obligation, to manage that money for your benefit and your benefit alone. Using it for home repairs is a breach of that duty. Using it to fund your brother's business?" She paused, shaking her head slightly. "That is a clear and flagrant violation. That's not a gray area." "So, it was illegal?" I asked, needing to hear the word, to have my reality confirmed. "Potentially criminal," she confirmed, her gaze unwavering. "Especially if there was intent to defraud. This isn't just a family dispute over money. This is a serious legal matter. The fact that the college fund was so substantial elevates it to felony territory in this state. You're not just a son who was wronged. You're the victim of a long-term financial crime." Hearing a lawyer validate my feelings, to give my betrayal a legal name, was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I wasn't just being dramatic. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't crazy. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice gaining strength. "You have several options," she explained, ticking them off on her fingers. "You can pursue a civil lawsuit to recover the funds, plus damages for the opportunities you lost. Or you could file a police report which might lead to criminal charges of theft and fraud. Given the family dynamic, that's a very personal decision. But your first step is the same regardless. Gather everything, every piece of evidence that shows your financial hardship. Pay stubs, loan applications you were denied, emails where you asked for help. Create a timeline. The clearer the picture of your struggle versus their spending, the stronger your case." I left her office with a folder full of notes and a renewed sense of purpose. I had a path forward. I had a plan. As if on cue, my phone rang as I stepped out into the cold air. It was my mother. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered, putting it on speaker for some reason I didn't yet understand. "Joshua, honey," she began, her voice thick with fake, choked back tears. "Your father and I have been so worried. We haven't slept. We just want to talk this out. We're family. You can't just tear us apart over some money." "Some money?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. It was my entire future. It was the roof over my head I couldn't afford, the food I didn't eat, the sleep I didn't get. "Don't be so dramatic," she sniffled, the victimhood in her voice making me sick. "We made mistakes. We were trying to do what was best for everyone. If you do anything drastic, you'll ruin this family. You'll ruin Liam's reputation. Is that what you want? To be the one who caused a divorce between your parents? To destroy your brother's life? Think of your grandparents." I gripped the edge of a nearby bench, my knuckles turning white. The emotional blackmail was so blatant, so shameless. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. I said nothing, letting her words hang in the air, letting her reveal her true nature. "Joshua, are you there? Please, baby. Let's just fix this quietly." "There's nothing to fix," I said, my voice as cold as the wind whipping around me. "You made your choices, hundreds of them. Now I'm making mine." I ended the call before she could reply. That phone call was the final push I needed. They wouldn't get away with it. They wouldn't manipulate me back into silence. Not anymore. A few days later, an unknown number flashed on my phone. I was getting tired of the emotional minefield my phone had become, but something made me answer. "Joshua?" A deep, familiar voice asked, a voice that commanded respect. "Grandpa," I said, surprised. I hadn't spoken to him since Thanksgiving. "I've been doing some thinking," William said, getting straight to the point as always. "Your father's explanation at Thanksgiving. It didn't sit right with me. Never has. I've watched you struggle for years, son. I would send you checks for your birthday, and your parents would always tell me you were fine and learning to be independent. I always suspected something was off, but I never wanted to believe your parents that my own son could be so dishonest, so cruel. I should have looked into it sooner. I'm sorry, Joshua. I failed you." His apology, so simple and sincere, so full of regret, nearly brought me to tears. It was the first time in my life a family member had acknowledged my struggle without judgment, without making it my fault. "It's not your fault, Grandpa," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "The hell it isn't," he grumbled, and I could hear the anger in his voice, an anger directed not at me, but for me. "I set up that fund to give you a fair start, and I let them manage it. I put my trust in the wrong people, but we're going to make this right." There was a pause, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his strategic mind. "I'm hosting the annual Christmas Eve party at my house. Your parents and Liam will be there. They wouldn't dare miss it. So will a lot of my business associates. Important people. People your father has been trying to impress for decades." I knew what he was implying. My heart started beating faster. "You want me to confront them there?" "I want you to do whatever you need to do to get justice," he corrected me, his voice firm. "If that means doing it in front of everyone so they have nowhere to hide, then so be it. I've got your back, Joshua. You will not be alone in this." His words were a lifeline. The thought of confronting my family was terrifying, but knowing my grandfather, the patriarch, the one person they couldn't manipulate or dismiss, would be standing by my side gave me a surge of courage I hadn't known I was capable of. He wasn't just offering emotional support, he was offering a strategic advantage. He was giving me the stage and an audience that mattered. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice turning grim. "I took the liberty of contacting my own lawyer after we spoke. He's not some legal aid attorney, he's a shark. He reviewed the trust documents I sent him. He believes you have a very strong case, not just for the money but for punitive damages as well. The conversation we're about to have with your parents isn't just about family disappointment. It's about a potential inheritance you were robbed of and the severe legal consequences of their actions." The word inheritance hung in the air. It reframed everything. This wasn't just about a college fund. It was about a legacy, a start in life that I was entitled to, one that had been stolen from me piece by piece. My grandfather had seen a potential in me that my own parents had actively worked to extinguish. "Okay, Grandpa," I said, my resolve hardening into steel. "I'll be there." "Good. Bring everything you have. Every piece of paper. We'll give them one chance to make it right in front of everyone." After that, the gloves come off. We hung up, and for the first time in a week, I felt a flicker of hope that was stronger than my anger. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a fighter, and I had a powerful ally in my corner. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I might actually win. The next 2 weeks were a blur of intense preparation. I felt like a lawyer cramming for the biggest trial of his life, and my tiny apartment became our command center. Chloe, my ever-loyal friend, was my paralegal, my strategist, and my unwavering moral support. "Okay, what's this one?" she'd ask, holding up a glossy credit card bill of my parents that Grandpa's lawyer had somehow obtained. "That's from the 5-star spa resort they went to for their anniversary," I'd reply, my voice dripping with scorn as I highlighted the date. "And look here," I'd point to a corresponding statement from my fund. A $5,000 withdrawal for household maintenance 2 days before they left. They were using my money to get seaweed wraps and massages while I was working double shifts to pay for my textbooks and living on instant noodles. We were relentless. We organized everything into a thick, 3-ring binder that became my holy book of evidence. The first section was the bank statements from my fund, with every single suspicious withdrawal highlighted in a garish, angry yellow. The next section contained Liam's company registration documents and glossy printouts from his social media, a timeline of his lavish lifestyle paid for by my hardship. The final, and most heartbreaking, section was the evidence of my struggle. My pay stubs showing a meager salary, my student loan statements showing the mountain of debt I was accumulating, copies of my landlord's late rent notices, and the printed-out emails I had sent my parents begging for help, all of which were met with silence or condescending lectures on financial responsibility. The binder grew thicker and heavier with each passing day, a physical manifestation of 2 decades of lies, greed, and neglect. It was damning. It was irrefutable. Chloe looked at the finished product, which we had labeled the Anderson file. Her expression was grim. "This is insane, Josh. It's like something out of a movie." "I wish it were," I said, closing the binder. The click of the rings sounded final, like a cell door locking. I feel strangely calm, and it was true. The raw, screaming anger and the deep, aching hurt were still there, but they had been channeled, focused into a cold, clear purpose. I wasn't going into that Christmas party as a wounded, emotional son. I was going in as a prosecutor, and the binder was my indictment. The night before the party, I barely slept. I kept running the confrontation through my head, planning my opening statement, anticipating their denials, their excuses, their inevitable attempts to turn it around and make me the villain. I knew it would be the hardest thing I had ever done. It wasn't just about exposing a financial crime. It was about officially ending my family as I knew it. It was about choosing myself, my sanity, and my future over the toxic illusion of a happy family that had been suffocating me for years. There was no going back after this. I knew it, and I was finally okay with that. I was ready. Christmas Eve at my grandfather's estate was a spectacle of wealth and influence. A massive, perfectly decorated fir tree stood in the grand foyer, its lights twinkling like captured stars against the dark, wood-paneled walls. A string quartet played softly in the corner, a civilized soundtrack to the quiet hum of power in the room. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved silently through the crowd with trays of champagne and impossibly fancy hors d'oeuvres. The air buzzed with polite conversation, expensive perfume, and forced holiday cheer. I walked in clutching my briefcase, the weight of the binder inside it both a burden and an anchor. I felt like a gladiator walking into the Colosseum. My parents saw me immediately. My mother's brittle smile froze on her face, and my father's eyes darted to the briefcase and then back to me, a flicker of raw panic in his gaze. They started towards me, a pincer movement designed to isolate me, to control the narrative before it could even begin. But my grandfather, ever the master strategist, intercepted them with a seemingly casual grace. "David, Sarah," he said, his voice pleasant but firm, placing a hand on each of their shoulders and steering them away from me. "Go mingle. I see the Harrisons over there. Joshua and I have some catching up to do." They had no choice but to obey. He led me to a strategic spot near the grand stone fireplace, where a few of his most important colleagues were gathered. Among them was Mr. Harrison, the CEO of a major tech firm, a man my father had been trying to get a meeting with for years. My grandfather introduced me, not as his struggling grandson, but simply as my grandson Joshua. Mr. Harrison shook my hand firmly, his gaze direct and assessing. This was all part of my grandfather's plan. He wasn't just giving me a stage. He was providing me with a jury of my family's peers, the very people whose opinions they valued above all else. I saw my brother, Liam, holding court across the room, surrounded by a circle of admirers. He was laughing, gesturing wildly with a champagne flute, as he described his latest business triumph. He looked relaxed, confident, the king of his castle, completely unaware of the earthquake that was about to swallow him whole. He caught my eye across the room and gave me a condescending little smirk, a look that said, "Look at all this, and look at you." That smirk sealed his fate. Any lingering shred of doubt I had about what I was about to do vanished in a puff of cold fury. For an hour I just watched. I nursed a single club soda, a silent observer at my own execution or, perhaps, my own resurrection. I let them live in their comfortable lie a little longer. I watched my mother laugh too loudly at a bad joke, my father network shamelessly, and my brother soak up the adoration like a sponge. It was all a performance, a meticulously crafted play, and I was about to go off script and burn the theater down. Finally, the moment came. My grandfather subtly cleared his throat, a small sound that nonetheless commanded immediate attention. A hush fell over the room as people turned their attention to him, expecting a holiday toast. But before he could speak, my father, David, ever the opportunist, stepped forward, raising his glass high. "If I could have everyone's attention," he began, beaming, a portrait of the proud family man. "I just want to say how wonderful it is to have everyone here. The holidays are about what truly matters: family, honesty, and integrity. It's a lesson I've always tried to instill in my sons, to build their lives on a foundation of truth." The hypocrisy was so thick, so audacious, I could have choked on it. That was my cue. I stepped forward from the fireplace, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my legs steady. "That's interesting, Dad," I said, my voice clear and strong, cutting through the silence like a knife. "Because I'd like to talk about honesty." Every head in the room swiveled towards me. My father's face went from ruddy to ashen in a heartbeat. My mother looked like she was about to faint. I walked to the center of the room, placed my briefcase on a large mahogany coffee table, and opened it with deliberate, slow movements. I took out the thick binder, its weight feeling solid and real and righteous in my hands. I held it up for everyone to see. For 27 years, I began, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed. I was told to stand on my own 2 feet, to work hard, to be a man, and I did. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through community college. I lived in apartments with broken heat and leaky faucets. I went into debt for my education, all while my parents told me they had nothing to give. That struggle builds character. I opened the binder to the first page, a copy of the initial deposit into my fund, the massive number visible to those nearby. And all that time this existed, a college fund, a future, my future, one that they secretly, systematically, spent on themselves. A collective gasp went through the room. The string quartet faltered and then fell silent. I started turning the pages, one by one, letting the silence hang between each revelation. Here's the $10,000 for Liam's new company. Here's the $50,000 for his angel investor seed funding. Here's the new roof, the family vacations I was never invited on, the new cars. All of it paid for by me, the son they told to be more responsible. I finally looked directly at my parents. Their faces had crumpled, their public masks shattered. This was no longer a private family matter. It was a public humiliation. "You didn't just spend the money?" I said, my voice dropping, filled with the cold fury of years of betrayal. "You stole my life. You built his success on my struggle. And you lied. To me, to Grandpa, to everyone in this room. You lied every single day." My father finally found his voice, sputtering with a rage born of pure desperation. "This is a private family matter. How dare you? How dare you air our dirty laundry in front of our friends and colleagues? I'm done with private matters." I shot back, my voice rising to match his. "Your secrets, your private matters, have cost me enough. I have nothing left to lose." My mother started to sob, a pathetic, theatrical sound designed to garner sympathy. "We were going to tell you, honey. We were so ashamed. We always meant to pay it back." "You weren't ashamed when you were spending it," I said, my voice cutting through her performance. "You weren't ashamed when you let me think I was a failure. You were only ashamed when you got caught." But the final, devastating blow didn't come from me. It came from my grandfather. He stepped forward, his face like granite, his eyes blazing with an anger that was terrifying to behold. "David, Sarah, that's enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous, silencing them instantly. And then came the ultimate twist, the one I had been waiting for, the final nail in their coffin. "You seem to be under a misapprehension, a lie you've perhaps told yourselves for so long you've started to believe it. This wasn't just some simple savings account you could dip into whenever you felt the need. I didn't just set up a college fund." He let the words hang in the air, his gaze sweeping over my parents, who were now looking at him in utter, terrified confusion. "I set up a legally binding trust fund," he declared, his voice booming through the silent room, each word a hammer blow. "An irrevocable trust with specific, ironclad stipulations that the funds were to be used only for Joshua's education and well-being. Any other use constitutes a breach of trust and, more importantly, felony fraud." My parents froze. The color drained completely from their faces. The word fraud echoed in the sudden, dead silence. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their expressions a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. My grandfather wasn't finished. Oh, he was far from finished. And when I started to suspect something was wrong after Thanksgiving, I didn't just sit on it. I hired a forensic accountant. He analyzed every single withdrawal you ever made. And he found something very interesting. He paused, his gaze locking onto my father, who looked like he might collapse. He found that dozens of the withdrawal slips, especially the largest ones that required a secondary authorization, were signed with a passable but ultimately fake forgery of my signature. "We have proof, David. We have handwriting analysis. We have sworn affidavits. We have everything." That was it. The final, devastating checkmate. This was no longer a moral failing they could explain away. It was a federal crime. Forgery. Bank fraud. Trust fraud. My father looked like he had been physically punched in the gut. He staggered back, shaking his head in disbelief, mumbling, "No, no, no." My mother let out a small, strangled cry and sank into a nearby chair, her face buried in her hands, her carefully constructed world turned to ash around her. Liam, for his part, just stood there, his face a mask of confusion and horror, as if he was only just now realizing that the golden pedestal he'd been standing on his whole life was made of stolen bricks. Mr. Harrison, the CEO, just stared at my father with an expression of utter, undisguised disgust. The performance was over. The masks had been ripped off, and the ugliness underneath was there for everyone to see. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a demolition. I had torn my family down to the foundations, and there was nothing left but rubble and lies. I closed the binder, the click echoing in the silent room. My work here was done. "You didn't just steal from me," I said, my voice quiet but carrying with lethal clarity. You stole from your own father. And you built a life, a family, on a mountain of lies. I turned and walked towards the door, the crowd of stunned guests parting before me like the Red Sea. This was the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my life. Thank you for staying with me until this point. You are amazing. Please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below, so I know you've been on this journey with me. This not only helps more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of my journey. The cold night air felt good on my hot face as I stepped outside into the crisp December evening. The sounds of the party were a distant, muffled hum. I didn't get far down the long, winding driveway before I heard someone call my name. I turned, my body tensing, expecting it to be one of my parents, ready for another round of excuses or accusations. But it was Mr. Harrison. He walked up to me, his hands in the pockets of his expensive tuxedo, his expression serious. "That took guts, son," he said, his voice full of a genuine respect I had never once received from my own father. "What you did in there, that was integrity. Standing up to your own family like that, in public, for the sake of the truth. That's a rare quality." I just nodded, still processing everything, not knowing what to say. "My company is always looking for people with a strong moral compass and the courage to stand up for what's right," he continued, his gaze direct. "Talent is common. Character is not. I have a paid internship program in our project management division. It's competitive, but I have a feeling you could handle it. Could lead to a full-time promotion. Think about it. My assistant will be in touch." He clapped me firmly on the shoulder, gave a curt nod, and walked away toward the valet. I stood there, stunned into silence. In the space of 10 minutes, I had destroyed my family and possibly been handed the first real opportunity of my entire life. The whiplash, the sheer irony of it all was overwhelming. Just then, another figure emerged from the warm light of the house, hurrying towards me. It was my Uncle Richard, my dad's brother. He had always been the cool uncle, the one who would slip me $20 on my birthday, the one who seemed to understand me. "Josh, wait up," he said, catching up to me, his breath fogging in the cold air. That was intense. I had no idea, man. No idea it was that bad. "Yeah, well, neither did I until a few weeks ago," I said, my guard still up but softening slightly. Maybe I had one ally left. "Listen, I get it. I really do. What they did was wrong, unforgivable even," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "But a police report? Lawyers? Is that really necessary? Think about the family's reputation. Think about your grandmother. This will destroy her. This will cause a divorce. Sometimes, for the good of the family, you have to handle things quietly, you have to let things go." And there it was, the second betrayal of the night, and in some ways it cut even deeper. He wasn't on my side. He was on the side of keeping up appearances. He was asking me to swallow my pain, my stolen future, my 28 years of struggle, all for the sake of the family's precious, fraudulent image. An image they had just proven was a complete sham. This was the final, unexpected twist from a man I thought was different. I looked at him, and all the warmth I ever felt for him turned to ice. "The good of the family has cost me my entire life, Uncle Richard," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I'm done paying that price so all of you can continue to live your comfortable lives." I turned my back on him without another word and walked away into the darkness, leaving him standing there in stunned silence. It was a lonely walk, but for the first time, it was a path I had chosen for myself. The ties to my family weren't just strained. They were severed, and I had been the one to wield the knife. I had almost reached my car at the end of the long driveway when I heard frantic, stumbling footsteps behind me on the gravel. "Joshua, please." It was my mother. She ran up to me, her elegant party dress now looking like a costume, her face a mess of tears and smeared makeup. She grabbed the sleeve of my coat, her grip surprisingly strong, like a drowning person. "Please don't do this. We can fix this. We'll pay you back, I swear it. We'll sell the house. Your father he'll apologize. Just don't involve the police. Don't send your father to jail. He won't survive it. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt a profound and unsettling emptiness. The well of emotion I had for her, the childhood love, the adolescent hurt, the adult anger, it had finally completely run dry. All I saw was a desperate woman trying to escape the consequences of her own actions. There was no remorse in her eyes, only fear. Fix this, I asked, my voice eerily calm, a stark contrast to her hysteria. You want to fix this now? Where was this desperation when I called you from a payphone, begging for $500 because my car broke down and I couldn't get to work? Where was this urgency when I was eating ramen noodles for a week straight because I couldn't afford groceries? You didn't want to fix anything then. You told me it was a lesson in character. We made a mistake, she wailed, the words a hollow refrain. A terrible, terrible mistake. No, I said, gently but firmly removing her hands from my coat. A mistake is something you do by accident. You spill a glass of wine. You take a wrong turn. You made a choice. Every single time you signed a withdrawal slip from my account, you made a choice. You chose Liam over me. You chose a new roof over my education. You chose your comfort over my survival. For 27 years, you made the same choice over and over and over again. I took a step back, putting a final, definitive space between us. I looked her straight in the eye, forcing her to see the stranger her son had become. You can't fix something, I said, the words coming out slow and clear, each one a perfectly polished stone of truth, that you never intended to keep whole in the first place. Her face crumpled, the last bit of fight leaving her as the weight of my words landed. She understood. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a verdict. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. In my rearview mirror, I could see her standing there, a small, broken figure under the festive, mocking Christmas lights of my grandfather's mansion. It was the last time I ever saw her. The 6 months that followed were a whirlwind of deconstruction and rebuilding, both legally and personally. True to his word, my grandfather's lawyer was a shark. Faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud, forgery, and breach of trust, my parents had no choice but to settle out of court to avoid criminal prosecution. They sold their large house, liquidated their stock portfolios, and paid back every single cent they had taken from my trust, plus a substantial amount in damages for lost investment potential and emotional distress. It was a massive sum that effectively wiped them out. I never asked what other legal ramifications they faced. My grandfather handled it, and I felt that not knowing was a form of peace I was entitled to. My only condition was that the money they had invested in Liam's company came directly out of their share, not mine. The golden child would have to face his own reckoning. Mr. Harrison was also true to his word. I started the internship the next month. For the first time in my life, I was in a professional environment where my ideas were valued and my hard work directly led to recognition and opportunity. I wasn't just bussing tables anymore. I was contributing to projects, learning new skills, and building a career. The constant, grinding exhaustion that had been my companion for a decade began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose and a decent, steady salary. I was promoted from intern to a full-time project coordinator within 5 months. With the settlement money, the very first thing I did was pay off my entire student loan debt in one lump sum. Watching that 6-figure balance drop to zero on the screen felt like breaking free from a set of chains I thought I'd carry for the rest of my life. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated freedom. I moved out of my dingy studio and into a clean, bright one-bedroom apartment in a better part of town. It had a balcony, a dishwasher, and a sink that didn't drip. To me, it felt like a palace. But the most important and difficult thing I did was start therapy. The financial wounds were healing, but the emotional ones were deep and infected. I had to unlearn a lifetime of feeling worthless, of believing I was second best. I had to learn that I was allowed to take up space in the world, that my needs mattered, that I was worthy of a good life. It was hard work, harder than any double shift I'd ever pulled. There were days I would leave my therapist's office feeling raw and exhausted, but each session was like chipping away at the stone that had encased my heart. My relationship with my grandparents blossomed into the one I had always craved. We had dinner together every Sunday. My grandmother Eleanor, who had been quietly horrified and heartbroken by the whole ordeal, would fuss over me, making sure I was eating enough, her love a warm, comforting blanket. My grandfather and I would talk for hours about my new job, about the stock market, about his life, about my life. They became the family I never really had. They showed me what unconditional love and support actually looked like. It wasn't about grand gestures or empty words. It was about being there, consistently and honestly. One evening, my grandfather and I were sitting on his porch, watching the sunset. He turned to me and said, "You know, Joshua, I'm proud of you. And I'm not talking about the money or the job. I'm proud of the man you are. You have a spine of steel." Coming from him, the man I respected most in the world, it meant more than any amount of money in any bank account. I was finally building a life that was truly my own. Not one of survival, but one of intention. I was healing. I was becoming whole. I thought I had closed the book on that chapter of my life for good. My parents and brother were out of my life, distant, ghost-like figures in a past I was actively moving on from. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A cold knot of anxiety formed in my stomach, but I answered cautiously. "Josh? It's Liam." His voice was strained, thin, completely stripped of its usual smug confidence. I hadn't spoken a single word to him since that Christmas Eve. I said nothing, waiting, letting the silence stretch. "Look, man, I'm in some trouble," he stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "The company, it folded. It's gone. After the settlement, Mom and Dad they couldn't fund it anymore. The investors pulled out when they heard. It's all gone. Everything." I still said nothing. I just listened to the sound of his golden-plated entitlement finally crashing against the hard rocks of reality. "I know things are messed up between us," he continued, his voice taking on a wheedling, pathetic tone I recognized from my mother. It was the sound of manipulation. "But you got all that money from the settlement. You're set for life. I got nothing, Josh. I'm about to be evicted from my condo. I was thinking, maybe you could float me a loan? Just a small one to get back on my feet. You know, for old time's sake. We're still brothers, right?" I waited. I waited for the apology. I waited for a hint of remorse, a glimmer of self-awareness. I waited for a single word that acknowledged his role in all of this, that acknowledged my stolen money had built his entire house of cards. It never came. He didn't see me as a brother he had wronged. He still saw me, even now, as a resource to be tapped. This was the final, pathetic, predictable twist in our story. "Liam," I said, my voice perfectly level, completely devoid of the emotion that was swirling inside me. "Did Mom and Dad ever tell you, specifically, where the money for your company came from?" There was a long, telling pause on the other end of the line. I could hear his shallow breathing. They said it was an investment," he mumbled, his voice small. "From Grandpa. A gift." "No," I said, letting the truth land with its full, brutal weight. "It was from me. Every dollar that built your success, every brick in your fraudulent career, came from my college fund. The one you knew about, the one you heard Grandpa ask me about on Thanksgiving, the one you watched me suffer without." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of his complicity. He couldn't deny it. He had known on some level. He had chosen not to ask questions. "So is that a no?" he finally asked, his voice petulant, like a spoiled child being denied a toy. That was the moment I knew for sure. He would never change. He was a black hole of need, created and enabled by our parents. Any last shred of empathy I might have had for him, any lingering ghost of brotherly affection, vanished forever. "I'm saying you should have learned to stand on your own 2 feet a long time ago," I said, using our father's own cruel words against him. "It builds character." And with that, I hung up. I blocked his number. It wasn't an act of anger or revenge. It was an act of finality. an act of self-preservation. It was the final loose thread being snipped. The book was now truly, completely, and irrevocably closed. It's been a year since that Christmas, a year of profound and difficult change. I'm sitting on the balcony of my apartment, the one I pay for with a salary I earned, not a fund I was robbed of. The city lights twinkle below me, a sea of possibilities that no longer feels out of reach. I'm doing well at my job. I'm still in therapy, and I probably will be for a while. And I have dinner with my grandparents every single Sunday. It's the anchor of my week. I don't hate my parents or my brother anymore. Hate is a heavy burden, and I've carried enough weight for one lifetime. Now I just don't think about them. They are characters in a story about a different person, a younger, more wounded version of myself. When I do think of them, I feel a distant pity. They built their family on a foundation of lies and secrets, and it inevitably crumbled, leaving them with nothing but the ugly truth of who they are. My journey was about more than just a stolen inheritance or a family's deep betrayal. It was about finding my own voice, a voice that had been silenced for 28 years. For most of my life, I let other people write my story. They cast me as the struggling, unambitious son, the failure, the afterthought. I was so busy trying to survive, trying to keep my head above water, that I never stopped to question the narrative they had written for me. I just assumed it was true. That Thanksgiving was the day the book was slammed shut by a force outside my control. And that Christmas was the day I picked up the pen and started writing my own story, in my own words. I learned that strength isn't about silent endurance. It's not about swallowing your pain to keep the peace for people who don't care about your peace. True strength is about drawing a line in the sand and saying, with a clear voice, no more. It's about choosing your own well-being over someone else's comfort, even if that someone is your own family. It's about fighting for the truth, not because you want revenge, but because you deserve to live in it. My life isn't perfect now. It's not a fairy tale, but it's real, and it's mine. And for the first time, that feels like more than enough. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to stand up for yourself against the people who were supposed to protect you? Share your story in the comments below, and please don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what I have to share next. Your support truly means the world.